Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. The president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, has said he is willing to restore consular relations with the Colombian government. This comes after Venezuelan authorities apprehended former Senator Aida Melano, who escaped from a Colombian prison last year.
Yo estoy dispuesto.
I am willing to restore relations at the consular level with the Colombian government so that all these issues can be carried out through the appropriate channels.
Iván
Duque, enough of such folly, enough of this ideological fanatism, enough of your political extremism. Put your feet on the ground and let's be pragmatic.
Uruguay's president-elect Luis Lacalle Pou has presented an urgent bill to Parliament weeks before taking office, a bill that has been criticized by progressive parties and social movements.
The incoming government's emergency bill is criticized on a daily basis, as many in Uruguay see it as a move backwards for the many social advances made by the South American nation. In particular, an item regarding public security that was drafted from a highly repressive perspective.
Upon first reading the bill, one can't help but be concerned because their answer to security issues is repression.
Among other things, the bill proposes the protection of all security forces who, during their official activities, wound or kill civilians.
This bill satisfies a number of demands from within the police. It also reinforces the idea that all security forces in Latin America have their hands tied, and this bill unties them. But this is something that was not born out of social demands, but from within the police.
Future opposition sectors have said this law authorizes the easy trigger principle, as police will now act under the idea of shoot first, ask questions later.
This is undemocratic. It's making police into super people who are above the law. It also puts their lives at risk, as gunfire only increases violence. Their message seems to be, police can shoot first and then figure out what the issue was.
Another item in the bill is the imprisonment of those who insult the police. Individual liberties are eliminated and people's rights will be under attack, as this law would also criminalize social protest.
This bill has a very harsh outlook of social mobilizations. The wording is irresponsible and it will only cause tension among the population.
Lacalle Pou's bill is under urgent consideration. Now, the 5 parties that make up his right-wing coalition will study the project and could make modifications to the final draft. It should be approved within 90 days, around the time the incoming president is set to take power.
At least 66 people have died and others are reported missing after heavy rains and flooding hit southeastern Brazil. Streets were flooded and cars swept away in Brazil's third biggest city, Belo Horizonte, by the worst storm on Tuesday night. January has been the wettest month there for over 100 years. The rains have forced more than 80,000 people from their homes in the states of Minas Gerais, Espírito Santo, and Rio de Janeiro. Social movements say the flooding has been worse because of the collapse of mining dams in the region in recent years.
After the collapse of the dams in Fundão and Feijão, specialists have studied the river and say these floods are much worse than previous ones. But the data shows this clearly, where with a smaller rise in the level of the river, the waters spread much further into the houses than before. In the floods of 2013, so we are demanding that the justice system acts to hold the Vale mining company responsible for making this flooding worse, and that it pays compensation.
Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemos, has more.
The rains have eased in Minas Gerais, which is where most of the deaths have occurred and where the largest number of people have been forced from their homes by the floods over the last week. However, sporadic rains are expected to continue for the rest of this week and next. One of the main concerns now is the large number of people who have lost their homes or been evacuated. The latest numbers are 55 dead and 1 person disappeared in Minas Gerais, with 55,000 who have had to abandon their homes just in that state. There are 101 towns and cities in a state of emergency, In the neighboring state of Espiritu Santo, there are 9 dead, 1 disappeared, and nearly 3,500 homeless. While in Rio de Janeiro state, the numbers are 2 dead, 8 cities in a state of emergency, and 16,000 displaced. There are also accusations over the effects on the rivers of the collapse of the dams at Brumadinho in 2019 and Mariana in 2015. The movement of those affected by dams, the MBA, has given a news conference at the Legislative Assembly in the capital of Minas Gerais, Belo Horizonte. They accuse both government institutions and the Valley Mining Company of failing to respond to the situation. In particular, they refer to the contamination of the rivers Doce and Parapeba by the mining operations of Valley, which they say have aggravated the flooding, affecting not only tens of thousands of people, but also large numbers of livestock in this agricultural region.
That was our correspondent Ignacio Lemos with that report. In Chile, the prosecutor's office has charged police officer Carlos Martinez Ocares with the murder of Colo-Colo football fan Jorge Mora. The officer allegedly ran over 37-year-old Mora with his car after a football match on Tuesday night. Relatives of the victim say he was deliberately targeted by the police, who then prevented him from receiving medical treatment. And a vigil for Jorge Mora ended with police repression and 2 subway stations being set alight. Police intervened to try to disperse the vigil, and some protesters responded by setting fire to a metro station and to a police armored car. Moving on, Argentina's lower house has approved a bill that will allow the government to negotiate the restructuring of public debt. With 224 votes in favor and 2 against, the bill grants the government broad powers to seek the restructuring of about $195 billion of the country's $311 billion in public debt. The legislation will now go to the Senate. The International Monetary Fund, which lent $57 billion to Argentina, said it will send a delegation to Buenos Aires in February to discuss the matter. On Wednesday, Bolivia's Attorney General suspended the hearing of statements by Luis Arce, the presidential candidate of the movement towards socialism, as there were a number of procedural errors committed by officials. We have more in this report.
Movement Towards Socialism candidate Luis Arce was accompanied by supporters on his way to the prosecutor's office, where just 10 days ago, a judicial process was taken up, which had first been initiated 4 years ago.
Yesterday he was summoned, and since yesterday he was considered accused, and as of yesterday he was the right to revise the corresponding documentation.
The Attorney General took into account that Luis Arce was not made aware of the accusations being brought against him, nor the evidence. This resulted in the suspension of the hearing until the accused and his defense are properly informed on the legal proceedings.
Myself and the team of lawyers have not had access to legal documentation to know exactly what I'm being accused of. What is the alleged crime that I have committed? In this investigation, there are more than 40 bodies that I should know about, more than 70 annexes that I should know about. I was happily accompanied by people from the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Arce said that the legal process in which he's accused was only pursued once he was formally nominated as candidate of the Movement Towards Socialism. And he says that it's part of the political and judicial persecution carried out by the de facto government.
I have come to testify because I have nothing to hide. I am not corrupt. I am not a thief.
Since the time that the Movement Towards Socialism candidate arrived in La Paz on Tuesday, he's received an outpour of solidarity from supporters and members of the party, a party which has become the largest in Bolivia over the course of the last 14 years.
We have come to support our president, who is going to be our fighter. He won't leave us. He is going to fight for the women, and he is going to fight until the end.
We have come to see our president, who are we going to elect in May. That are we going to elect him as a president, Luis Arce Catacora and David Choquehuanca.
Freedoms are being restricted in Bolivia since the coup government has taken office. Unfortunately, the union leaders and also the leaders of the movement towards socialism are being unjustly persecuted.
Leaders of the movement towards socialism have been subjected to judicial persecution since the November 10th coup. With the May 3rd elections just around the corner, they're confident that they have the support to win the presidency and to return the country's democracy and institutions back to normal.
Mexico has deported scores of Central American migrants who were arrested after they forced their way through a police blockade and headed for the United States. Around 500 men, women and children who were part of a caravan of roughly 5,000 scrambled over a rusted metal fence and surged into a concrete riverbed towards San Diego on Sunday. Mexican authorities confirmed the 98 arrests on their country's side, saying there were instigators in the migrant caravan pushing people to illegally cross the border.
It was the first time I made the journey. Now I'm asking people to not to try it, because the situation with crossing the Mexican border is tough. I ask mothers to not take their children, because it's tough to see a child on the journey under the burning sun.
And the new migrant caravan will set off from El Salvador with close to 8,000 people trying to reach the United States. It is expected that the caravan will arrive to Mexico's southern border by this weekend. Activists and human rights defenders say that Mexico's strategy to stop migration flows violates human rights. We'll take a short break. When we come back, a Caribbean nation is praising China for its developmental assistance. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Dominica's Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett is assuring landowners who have concluded negotiations with the government for the construction of a new international airport that their funds will be released soon. This as he expressed gratitude to China for its assistance in the project.
And so I want to thank the government of the People's Republic of China for this and for their commitment to financing it, because we all know that it would be impossible for us as a nation, to finance the airport by ourselves. And so to have a friend and a developing partner like China, you know, who's committed to assisting us with the construction of the airport is certainly a wonderful gift to the people of Dominica.
The non-governmental activist group Jamaica AIDS Support for Life has called for a broader definition of sexual harassment to include stalking and harassment in the streets. The suggestions were made at a joint select committee of Parliament reviewing the new bill on Wednesday.
The reality is, street harassment is one of the most common forms of harassment worldwide. And we were very much disappointed to see that this legislation as being contemplated was confined to institutions. We think that it provides an excellent opportunity for us to look at street harassment. It is one of the forms of harassment that has had damning effects of many of our citizens. The data out there shows that 68% of harassment that takes place is street harassment. We find persons having to change their route, change their mode of operation, going to a different supermarket each week. We spoke of the supermarkets earlier, simply because they are trying to avoid passing the garage, passing the bar where the guys always hang out, to avoid being harassed.
Social organizations in Ecuador are demanding that the state prioritize the fight against gender-based violence. This demand comes as the Inter-American Court for Human Rights works on a sexual violence case that took place in Ecuador.
Paola Guzmán Albarracín was 14 years old when the vice principal of her school started abusing her. At 16 years old, Paola killed herself and her abuser was never sanctioned. This case is the first school sexual violence case to be investigated by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. It is expected that the ruling will set the standards to address sexual violence against minors in all Latin America.
El caso de
Paola's case shows that this country doesn't care about abuse. Paola killed herself after asking for an abortion, a procedure that must be the responsibility of the state. Her death is a femicide because if abortion was legal, Paola would still be alive. And now the state has to stand trial in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for their role in her death.
Recently, authorities introduced an online tool to automate the request and delivery of legal measures against abusers. Nonetheless, women rights groups say this is not enough to face the widespread danger that women live with every day in Ecuador.
Representatives from these institutions have not spoken clearly about what their strategies will be.
On top of all of this, recent investigations have revealed that in 2019, a femicide was committed in Ecuador every 71 hours.
We are concerned that the state has different figures and avoids treating gender-based violence with the concern it deserves. We closed the year with 106 murdered women. 66% of them were raped by people close to them. I refer to this because it's important to say that gender-based violence is not only an issue in the streets, but inside homes as well.
According to the prosecutor's office, during 2019, 65 femicides took place in the country, figures that vary greatly from those shared by women rights organizations. These activists also say that the state must reevaluate their public policies to curb gender-based violence, in particular after implementing budget cuts that will further endanger those most vulnerable.
Moving to Africa, former Ivory Coast Prime Minister Guillaume Soro has announced his intention to run for president in the next elections. Soro, who is living in exile in France after a falling out with the current government on allegations of treason, said he will return to his country. Soro was Prime Minister from 2007 to 2012. He later became President of the National Assembly and quit in 2019.
I am a candidate for the presidency of the Republic of Ivory Coast, first of all because I love my country. And after all these years in government, in the National Assembly, I think I can better serve my country.
A group of people protested outside the United Arab Emirates Embassy in Sudan against the alleged trafficking of local men who have been recruited to join the militias of Libyan General Khalifa Haftar. Demonstrators are accusing a company from the UAE of being involved in the scheme. This after the United Nations revealed that cargo and freight company Black Shield was colluding with a Sudanese general to recruit poor young men, offering them jobs as security guards in the Middle East. Meanwhile, Haftar's so-called Libyan National Army is preparing to launch a major offensive against forces loyal to the United Nations recognized government of national accord. LNA field commanders say they are waiting for senior officials to give the order for forces to advance towards the west to take over towns currently under the control of the GNA. On Sunday, the GNA accused Haftar of violating the ceasefire signed in Moscow 2 weeks ago.
We are awaiting the instructions of the General Command so we can approach this corrupt group of Syrians who deal with artillery, grad artillery. We are monitoring them and know their locations and how they move and work. Mercenaries from the Chadian Justice and Equality Movement are also fighting alongside them, but we, God willing, we monitor all their movements, and very soon any orders or instructions issued by the General Command, they will be eliminated as soon as possible, God willing.
A ship carrying some 400 migrants that were rescued off the coast of Libya has finally been allowed to dock in the Italian port of Taranto. The migrants, including pregnant women and babies, were stranded on the Mediterranean Sea for more than 4 days as they waited for Italian authorities to grant the ship authorization to dock. On Monday, the United Nations said the war in Libya is forcing more migrants to take the risky journey across the Mediterranean Sea. 1,283 migrants died last year while attempting to make the journey. When we come back, protests in India against the new citizenship law are raging on. Stay with us for details on that and more.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursday, only on FtS.
The number of confirmed cases of pneumonia caused by the novel coronavirus in China has risen to 7,830, with at least 80 cases confirmed abroad. As of now, the death toll from the virus stands at 170, while over 130 patients have been officially discharged from hospitals after recovering from the infection. Preventative measures remain in full effect as the streets of major cities have become virtually deserted. On Wednesday, the Director General of the World Health Organization said that China deserves the international community's gratitude for implementing the appropriate measures to contain the spread of the outbreak, as less than 1% of all cases have been reported abroad.
The level of commitment from China is incredible. Some people on social media, I will be open with you, were criticizing for praising China. I will praise China again and again because its actions actually helped in reducing the spread of coronavirus to other countries.
But the whole world needs to be on alert now. The whole world needs to take action and be ready for any cases that come, either from the original epicenter or from other epicenters that become established.
Meanwhile, 2 new emergency hospitals being built in the city of Wuhan will soon be finished. Both hospitals will be fully dedicated to the treatment of patients infected with the coronavirus, with capacity for over 3,000 beds. Authorities announced the construction of the first building on January 24th, and it is expected to be fully operational by February 3rd. Palestine's ambassador to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, has announced that President Mahmoud Abbas will request that the UN Security Council pass a resolution to condemn U.S. President Donald Trump's so-called peace plan.
These consultations will be culminated in a visit by President Abbas within the next 2 weeks to the Security Council, in which he will put before the entire international community the reaction of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian leadership against this onslaught against the national rights of the Palestinian people by the Trump administration. And we will also be consulting with everyone to hopefully by that time we will have agreement on a text that the Security Council will vote on it.
Police in India have arrested a man who opened fire during protests against the new citizenship law in the capital, New Delhi. The man fired a single-barrel gun at demonstrators before being apprehended by police. Luckily, no one was injured. Meanwhile, his motives are not yet known. Protests against the citizenship law started in December last year and are continuing despite security forces' crackdown on demonstrators.
He walked out in front of the protesters holding a 3.15 caliber Golden gun. He was in front of all the people, protesters, and policemen who were standing nearby, but he jumped in from the side, brandished the gun and said, "Come, I will give you freedom." Everybody said. The media recorded the scene and then he backed off as the policeman approached him. And after that, he fired in front of himself, not up or down. And he repeated, "Come, today I will give you freedom."
At least 9 people have been killed and thousands displaced by flash floods and landslides in Indonesia. Residents fled their homes to temporary shelters as heavy rains sparked disaster in North Sumatra. Local authorities have attributed the catastrophe to illegal logging, which might have loosened the soil, making it susceptible to mudslides.
The victims were swept away by the water. They happened to be riding a minibus when they were struck in the flooding. They were swept away and hit the logs.
We have deployed all available resources. Even I myself is on the ground. In my opinion, this area had never got heavy flooding like this before.
That brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.